Welcome to the Privileges and Elections Committee meeting for March 1st. We have several patrons who've signed up to have their bills heard, starting with Delegate Anderson.
Call the roll.
Oh, let's call the roll first.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay. Delegate Anderson, I think you have two bills. No, whichever one you prefer to start with.
All right, we start with House Bill 86. House Bill 86 requires the Department of Elections to create a website that would be searchable and usable for campaign finance contributions, very similar to how we all use VPAP. VPAP's not controlled by the Department of Elections. This would require the Department of Elections to have such a website. Virginia is one of only a few states in the nation where the State Board of Elections doesn't provide this searchable data to the public. The public has to go and download campaign finance forms and manually calculate those as they are. The fiscal impact, I got a phone call from a few of the senators, is $147,200, and it is in the House budget.
The members of the committee, are there questions for Delegate Anderson about this bill?
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Dietz.
Delegate Anderson, if we're getting this information from VPAP, what's the value in us having this information provided by the Department of Elections?
Sure, Senator Dietz. I think at first you have to ask yourself, what's the core function of government? If the core function of government is to provide this usable data, then the Department of Elections should have it. Secondly, the VPAP isn't controlled by the Department of Elections. So if there's an error, if there's an omission, there's no way to correct that from a governmental standpoint. We all rely on VPAP, and they do a great job, but there's no regulatory enforcement over them.
So, Mr. Chair, it's kind of like in Russia where the state controls the press, and they get to fix any errors. But in this country, the New York Times or the Washington Post or whoever the rich guys are that own those papers. They aren't government. We don't get to fix their errors.
Well, and I think they do a great job. I'm not saying that VPAP's not doing a great job. I just think it's the core function of government, that the government should be providing this information. And this was part of the study. I was not here. This was part of one of the recommendations. Any valid campaign finance reform has to come from valid searchable data from the public, and that should be coming from the government, not from a third party. And VPAP would still have other roles. They do all these analysis and things like that. But to know how much who donated to you, Senator, and how you spent that money, I would go to VPAP, not to the Board of Elections.
Delegate, if I can follow up and ask, based on the fiscal impact that you mentioned, do you think you're going to be able to do it as well as the nonprofit sector might? I mean, do you envision this database is going to be as user-friendly and so forth? Or
I think VPAP serves a lot of functions, such as incumbent pairing and things like that during redistricting. They're still going to do other services.
I'm not concerned about the survival of VPAP. What I'm concerned about is, will they be able to? Will this government function that you envision be as user-friendly and as well done? For the amount of money that you have in your budget amendment or in your fiscal impact statement, will they be able to do anything on that magnitude?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I went to the Department of Elections and I said, this is what I want, something like VPAP or better, and they said it would cost this. So I suspect, and there is a 1-year delay in enactment on this, so that they'll have an entire year to develop the website, and hopefully I would have some input if it was not good.
Okay. Unless there are more questions from members of the committee, this is a bill that we've not heard before. We'll hear 2 minutes from members of the public in favor and 2 minutes against. Are there those in the audience who would like to speak for this, in the room, this real room, not virtual, who would like to speak for this bill? Are there any in the room who would like to speak against this bill? Okay. Virtually, I would ask Ms. Van Dyke, are there people virtually who wanted to speak?
If you are in the Zoom room and wish to speak in regards to this bill, please raise your hand electronically now. Mr. Chairman, we have 2 speakers, beginning with Jessica Mott.
Okay. Ms. Mott, please begin.
Hi, Jessica Mott, Virginia Chapter of American Promise. I want to speak to that this would provide disaggregated data to the public. Most of what VPAP supplies is already aggregated analysis, and it would help to make it publicly accessible, searchable, and sortable, and therefore help the public, campaigns, and VPAP by facilitating identification and resolution of information gaps, inconsistencies, and duplications. And it would also complement Senate Bill 492 on oversight, which was just approved by the Senate today.
Thank you. And we next have Nancy Morgan. You've got a minute remaining.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for Delegate Anderson for this excellent bill, which we support. As a nonpartisan group, we particularly appreciated the fact that the bill has 22 sponsors from both parties and across chambers. And obviously, as he's expressed it, it builds the capacity of the Department of Elections. If you go on their website, they have as a mandate to provide public access to information. To be clear, this isn't an anti-VPAP bill. We think VPAP provides wonderful analysis, but it's not appropriate, as others have said, nor the responsibility of a nonprofit, privately managed entity funded by donors to be the sole source of data on campaign finance records. And I've gone into the Department of Elections website to try to find, it's impossible to get any data about it, from it. And we're one of the few states in the country in which there's no investment in publicly managed disclosure of campaign finance records to the general public. And I think you might be interested in terms of the fiscal impact, $147,000. We went into the governor's budget under the Department of Election, which is $19 million, only $185,000 is allocated to campaign finance. So it's clear that it's been investment in both the capacity and in terms of manpower and finances, that this aspect of the Department of Election has been neglected, and we hope this bill is...
We're exhausting our time. So let's now see if there are no other questions from members of the committee, if there's a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Senator Bell.
Reading in the fiscal impact of the bill, it says that the estimate assumes that the online application would not provide any functionality for data analysis or visualizations. And then if I read the bill, if I'm interpreting it correctly, and frankly, I'm not saying this to cause harm, because I think I agree with your argument. It is an inherently government function. It says on line 38, the interfaces shall provide user tools for manipulating and exploring data. And I would say that kind of goes in line with data analysis, not necessarily visualizations. So I'm a little concerned that they may have underestimated this, that they're not going to give us the functionality that the bill seeks. Can you speak to that, or did they give you any insight into that?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll respond to the senator's question. The way it was described to me is it's not going to be as good as VPAP visually, but it's going to have the exportable functionality for people to go online and say, how much did Tim Anderson raise in this period, and what did Tim Anderson spend that money, and how did he spend it? And he'll be able to manipulate it rather than having to manually download those reports and add those up with a calculator. So maybe it'd be a good analysis of Windows versus DOS. It might not look as graphical, but it will be able to be exportable, which is the key function here.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, one follow-on.
Yes, Senator Bell and then Senator Boyce go to follow.
The follow-on, this is on the, making sure I have this, the fiscal impact is for building these functions. How about ongoing costs, keeping it up?
So thank you, Senator, for that question. It's my understanding, according to the conversations I've had with the Department of Elections, this information is inputted into a central system anyway, and it would feed in. It's a one-time cost. There's no anticipated expenses. They're going to build this portal, and when they're loading their information in, it will just dump into the portal.
I thank the gentleman.
We're going to hear from Senator Boyce and then from Senator Surville.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering if anybody from the Electoral Board or anybody from the administration is here and what the position is. If you could give us some input.
Hello, I'm Rachel Lawless from the Department of Elections. I'm the Confidential Policy Advisor.
And question?
Yes, Senator Boysko.
Thank you, Ms. Lawless. As far as the elect system that we have in place, I know that we already can do some searches. What does the administration or the office have any position on the bill, or do you feel that what we have is adequate already? I just am trying to make sure that we're really doing our due diligence here.
The department takes no position on this bill or the administration. The information is available through FOIA and the current interface. How user-friendly that is up to the user on that.
Okay. If there is a motion to report, it would be to report and refer to finance. Is there a motion on the bill? Okay, there's been a motion and a second to report and refer to finance. All in favor will vote aye on the electronic voting board. Opposed will vote nay. Okay.
It's 15-0.
And that was your first bill in the Senate, or your first bill before our committee?
First bill before your committee.
Okay, and that was not even a hazing, believe it or not.
Well, hey, I've been in courts or judiciary for a while, and it's been rough over there. So I didn't even know you all could agree on anything. So it was amazing. Fantastic. House Bill 68.
68.
So this bill is related to military members that have PCS orders, permanent change of station orders in Virginia. And so basically right now, currently under our law, those members cannot vote in Virginia, register to vote in Virginia, unless they change their physical residency. Now, they're not required to do that under federal law. And the Department of Elections discourages any individual who's temporarily here with an intent to leave. These PCS military members, at least in Hampton Roads, live there for sometimes 10 or 20 years. They're here, they pay consumption taxes, they pay real estate taxes, and what this bill would allow them to do if they want to is register to vote in Virginia, which would disenroll them in their home state from doing that, but would not require them to change their home of record to Virginia. And it's very important. We do this for college students. And I think we should have the same benefit to the military. On the Department of Elections website, on the How to Register website, it says, in order to register to vote, you must be a resident of Virginia with a paren that says, a person who has come to Virginia for temporary purposes and intends to return to another state is not considered a resident for voting purposes. So the military, this makes a very minor correction to the definitions and says that these PCS members, their spouses, and adult dependents would be considered residents for the purposes of voting in Virginia. And I would ask the committee to report this.
I would ask a question. Right now, the military's spouse or dependent is considered a resident for purposes of voting, but couldn't the member of the military, if they choose to pay Virginia taxes, just declare us their residence if they want to pay taxes and be part of the Commonwealth fully?
Sure, that could be the case. That's not required under federal law. And so generally they don't do that. Also, they move around quite a bit sometimes. And so somebody who might be here for 3 years may then move, another place, another PCS port. So we don't require college students to do anything different than what this bill would allow military people to do. College students coming from North Carolina can register to vote in Virginia because they're going to JMU. And that's all this bill is seeking to do, and that is a big block of people in Hampton Roads and other parts of Virginia, Northern Virginia, that right now are disenfranchised from that process because they're not home of record in Virginia.
Thank you. Are there members?
Mr. Chair,
Senator Deeds.
I'm interested in this permanent orders, station him in the Commonwealth. Does this apply to only career service members, or does it apply to someone who's, say, in a 3-year period of enlistment?
Sure, Senator Deeds. There's two types of orders that military individuals get: temporary orders and permanent change of station orders. Temporary orders, they're just here for training, maybe for 6 months or something. This would not apply to them. But somebody who's permanently ordered to Virginia for whatever period of time the military decides they could be here. It could be a year, it could be 3 years, it could be 10 years. But that permanent change of station in Virginia would trigger this ability for that service member to choose to.
And Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Deeds.
The permanent order is subject to change at any time?
Sure, yeah. A permanent order can always change in the military.
Okay.
And of course, as we know if they do choose to register in Virginia, they would be they wouldn't be registered at home as well.
And Mr. Chair,
Senator Deeds.
a member of the military that was here for a while could choose to become a resident of Virginia and register of their own volition without this code section, couldn't they?
If they chose to come here, that would subject them to changing their home of record to Virginia, which there's a disincentive to do that in Virginia under current taxing authority.
And so, Mr. Chair,
Yes, Senator
you're
Deeds.
suggesting that the members of the military should be given a special status as to anybody else who's here on work-related or college or related business or anything else?
Not special, the same, just the same status we give to students. The same status.
Except that they have to pay taxes and say they are residents here with no intent to go anywhere else. This is their home.
Most college students who are here aren't paying taxes, they're just going to school. These people are paying real estate taxes, consumption taxes, gas taxes. I mean, they're paying taxes. It's about the state income tax. I'm quite sure that this is.
You mean, Mr. Chair,
Yes,
the
Senator
reason
Deeds.
they don't want to say this is their home is because of the state income tax.
That, and also because they move around a lot. And so they may very well eventually be going back to South Carolina, going back to Florida. They're in transient, they're moving around, and I don't speak for every military member, of course, but there's a disincentive on the state tax side, and there's also an incentive that they're going back home at some point in the future at the end of their military career.
Okay.
Senator Serval, are you in the queue?
I am. Delegate, I was a question for the patron. I just noted that on lines 117 to 120, you list out all the services, and you've left out our brand new Space Force. And I was wondering
So I appreciate
why you don't like them.
I appreciate that. So I asked that question, and they are subject to the Air Force branch under the current thing. But if you'd like to add that line
Will they
amendment, I would
be
accept
voting
that
from
as
space,
the
perhaps?
Space Force.
I would accept that a friendly amendment.
But, Mr. Chairman, further question.
Yes, Senator.
So, Delegate, first of all, I'd question your premise. I mean, I have children who are college students, and they pay plenty of taxes. I know they don't pay real estate taxes. One's in a dorm, and the other one's in a house. But I'm sure they're paying real estate taxes through their rent. I'm sure they're paying sales taxes when they go out and buy food, or at least for the time being, depending on what happens this session. And they pay income taxes because my kids work. So it's not really clear to me that it's a clean analogy to say this is just like college students. I don't think it is. I mean, from my perspective, you have people who have purposely elected not to declare a domicile here to avoid paying income taxes. And so if they've made that election and that choice, I'm not sure why it is we would give them a special preference and allow them to participate in our elections here when they choose not to make that investment in our state. What is your thought about that?
Sure. So, Senator, a couple of deep dives on that. First, federal law gives the military members this special status to not have to pay taxes while they're in Virginia. So that's the federal protections that they get as military members. Second, many of them are here for decades, and they're paying their consumption taxes, as we already talked, but they're engaged in the schools. They're engaged in their city councils. They're on our roads. They're being affected by the government that they have no say in whatsoever. So I think that, your premise would be fine if we're talking about somebody who was here for 1 year or 6 months, but the majority of these members in Hampton Roads are there for a long time, and they're not allowed to participate in the process. They're not here voluntarily. They're being brought here by the military, and while they're here, they should have some say in who their school board members are. They should have some say in who their city council members are that affect the way that their communities are being operated.
With all due respect, before I get back to Senator Serval, they did volunteer to join the military. They weren't drafted into the military. And if they are here for 10 or 12 years and want to have a say in how my tax dollars are spent, it's only fair to have them contribute as other members of other citizens do, in my opinion. But let me bring it back to Senator Serval. Had a follow-up?
I did, Mr. Chairman. I would just also note, I guess, additional question for the patron. It's probably going to be more of a statement he can reply to. But, Hampton Roads isn't the only place where there's military. I represent two bases today, Fort Belvoir and Marine Corps Base Quantico. And there's also a lot of people who live in my district who are stationed at the Pentagon or Fort Myer or Bolling Air Force Base across the river, which I can get to in about 10 minutes from my house. And so it's not simply a Hampton Roads thing, I would point out. I would also note that, I'm very aware of the lack of registered voters on those military bases. I think at the Quantico Marine Corps base, about 100 people vote a year, even though there's thousands of people that live there. So I'm acutely aware of all this. But I would just suggest that our general fund, I want to say 70% of it's generated by income taxes, maybe, something like that, Madam Chairman? Yeah, so, and that goes a long way towards paying for the schools that you want to let them have a say in but not pay for. And so I'm just really scratching my head trying to understand, military folks get a lot of benefits. And we're also talking about giving retired military a lot of benefits. I'm just not clear why. I don't feel like if people want to vote, I think they ought to pay taxes. That's kind of where it comes down to me. And I'm just not feeling it. So I guess it's more of a statement. Isn't that true?
Senator Serval, I appreciate your comments. So there's no connection to paying taxes and voting. There's none under the Constitution or under any general principle. If it was a requirement that you had to pay taxes to vote, a lot of people would not be able to vote. And so I don't know that I go with you on this context that you have to be paying taxes to be eligible to vote in Virginia. I just would respectfully disagree with that premise.
But at the same time, in a sense, and I don't want to say evade taxes, but they're choosing not to pay taxes here. There's nothing stopping someone who's permanently stationed here, who buys a house here or whatever, from paying income taxes, or anything stopping them?
There's nothing stopping them. There is a federal law that allows them not to do that.
Right.
And they're availing themselves of that law because obviously they don't. I would assume that they don't.
Well, I think we've had a pretty thorough discussion among the members of the panel. Are there members in this room or people in the audience in the room who would like to speak for this bill? Are there people in the audience in the room who would like to speak against the bill? Are there people virtually, Ms. Van Dyke, who would like to speak?
If you are in the Zoom room and wish to speak in regards to this bill, please raise your hand electronically now. Mr. Chairman, there are no speakers.
Okay. So is there a motion on this bill?
Move the report.
The motion would need to, just to report. Okay. There's a motion and a second to report. So
Substitute motion to PBI.
And there's a substitute motion of PBI. All in favor of PBI and will vote aye on the electronic voting board. Okay. What's the vote total?
Ayes 6, noes 8, 1 abstention.
Okay, so we're back to the primary motion, which was to report. So all in favor of reporting will vote aye.
Ayes 10, noes 5.
Okay, your bill reports.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Next, waiting to present is Delegate Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have House Bill 125. And House Bill 125 is a transparency bill that deals with disclaimers on ads that are run. I may have a little bit of history of knowing about ads that sometimes get sent out without a disclaimer on there. This solely deals with one type, Mr. Chair. There's already penalties for sending ads out without disclaimers. What this says is that if an advertisement goes out that specifically mentions your opponent, that the penalty is now $10,000. I've been told by a number of consultants that $1,000, it's a business decision they make. Why not? It's $1,000 and they can take a huge hit without any fallout. So we're going to raise it to $10,000, and if that doesn't work, we'll see what happens next. But consultants need to have a bigger penalty before they do something that violates our law.
So currently, the penalty is within 14 days prior to the election, is a civil penalty not to exceed $2,500. This is one that expressly advocates against a clearly identified candidate. Are there questions from members of the committee? Okay. Are there people in the audience who would like to speak for this bill?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Surville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question of the patron.
Proceed.
So, I'm reading the your language here. I don't have the PDF up, but I can do that. But I guess under current law, somebody, I guess the State Board of Elections,
It would be, it's still the same, yes, sir.
has authority to fine somebody up to $1,000. Under this bill, it's a mandatory fine of $10,000.
It is.
No discretion.
No discretion. It's kind of funny. It's exactly the reason why we need this is it's that discretion for up to $1,000 that consultants don't care about. It's why mail pieces go out that are way over the top negative, that they were too cowardly to put their name on because they know they don't have to put their name on it. They will not have fallout. In worst case scenario, after the election's over, they're going to get with it with maybe $1,000, maybe it's $2,500. This says no, it'll be $10,000 now, and hopefully that's a little bit more of a deterrent of a consultant making a business decision, which is we're going to eat the penalty up to $1,000 or whatever, and do it anyway, and that's what's happening today.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Surville.
Sort of speaking to just speaking to the bill, I guess. I appreciate your anger, but I don't support mandatory anything when it comes to fines and penalties. I don't really feel like they deter a lot of anything. So as long as it's a mandatory $10,000 minimum fine, whatever you want to call it, that gives me heartburn. I think this body, at least last time I checked, has a pretty clear distaste for tying the hands of our officials to exercise their discretion when it's appropriate, although I appreciate why you think it ought to be a higher quantum closer to Election Day. The mandatory aspect of it really bothers me.
Well, and Mr. Chair, if I completely understand. It's really not anger. It's just, consultants that knowingly break the law. But we do mandate a lot of things here. We mandate transparency in numerous other parts of the law. We mandate that you cannot go out there and kill someone. Now, we may not mandate the exact penalty in some cases, and some we may, but we do mandate a lot of things. But if there's a law in place and we know it's being violated, because the penalty, it's not a criminal. Obviously this can come to a misdemeanor if you can prove willful, but you're not going to prove willful. So when the penalty does not deter it, you raise the penalty. And that's what we're seeing here. So that's all this does is just say $10,000, and it just raises basically a payment if they should violate it. I think what we're going to do is we're going to see consultants start thinking twice before they do this.
Okay. Senator Dietz, did you have a question, or were you?
Mr. Chair, I was going to suggest that, and on line 29, that $10,000 become $5,000. And that we do the same thing on line 24. $10,000 just seems like an awful lot to me. Up to $10,000, but $5,000 to $10,000.
$5,000, but no more than $10,000. Is that what you're saying? No.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think Scott's saying something else.
Senator Surville, did you want to comment?
Got two lawyers don't agree.
And then we're going to go to Senator.
Now, Mr. Chairman, all I'm saying is that I don't like tying the hands of anybody to do anything in terms of a quantum of punishment. And I understand that sounds like the delegate disagrees with that approach, and I'm sure he's voting for all the mandatory minimums as well and disagrees with us on that. But all I'm saying is I don't care so much about the ceiling as I do about the discretion. And I couldn't tell if his proposal was to take it down to 5 and say they could fine up to 5 or they had to fine 5. Up to 5. I'm fine.
I would say the proposal was a 4 or 5 up to 10.
Or you could just make it up to 10, but either or. Senator Boysko, do you have a comment?
I have a question, actually, just, Mr. Chair. Would this also apply to a local candidate and a town council race, a school board race, a supervisor's race?
Yes, ma'am, but it would only apply where the opponent is named. So the ads that sometimes squeak out by accident are not the ones that you're going after your opponent. Those are, you throw something out about yourself, it's a great picture of you and the family, and that's still covered under existing code, and we're not changing any of that. This solely deals when you run a negative hit piece on your opponent that you have to have the disclaimer. And I would say to Senator Villaville's suggestion, I'll take up to 50 and leave it discretion. I get the same thing. I mean, all I want is the deterrent out there that they say, let me think twice.
Well, then why don't we compromise and say up to 25,000?
I will take up to 25.
Nothing mandatory.
Nothing mandatory. Up to 25,000.
Up to 25,000.
Oh, I'll take
Going
that.
once, going twice.
Yeah. Okay, Senator Vogel has the floor.
Well, I was just going to say, Mr. Chair, if I may, I think what Delegate Davis is attempting to do is weigh in with legislation that will have a chilling effect on people who intentionally decide, I'm going to consider what the landscape is, and I'm going to make as a rational economic actor, I'm going to make a decision to do something that in the end is going to inure to my benefit, and notwithstanding whatever the penalty is going to be so small and the reward is going to be so great that I'm willing to, and can in Virginia, frankly, in the current environment, say something outrageous that is deeply offensive and frankly a severe violation of the law, but because there isn't a sufficient penalty, there isn't enough chilling effect to prevent somebody from putting something out there that is incredibly offensive and doesn't have the proper disclaimer so that nobody has to actually say, I said that. And they can do it, and it can have an enormous impact on an election. And I think that's what the delegate's trying to do. So I would like to, having just had our little sidebar here, I think if this committee would be willing to do it, I would say up to address the issue of discretion, up to.
Not to exceed.
Yeah, not to exceed $10,000.
So
Not to exceed 25,000.
I agree, 25,000.
Yeah, I'm good. So, because up to 10, so that means you go, it takes a lot of money to find out who sent this stuff out, right? This is not easy stuff to find out. So it's over $2,000 just to find out when a piece goes out, who sent it out. So at a minimum, the penalty should be in excess of the cost to figure it out, right? And so I'm fine with discretion, and I agree, up to 25,000 because that allows variables to come into play. Where the present one doesn't, but in such a case where it is a clear violation, the judge deems that this was an out and outright attempt to do X, the judge has discretion to go up to 25, but he could still do 1,000 if he liked.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
We've got first Senator Spruill, then Senator Bell.
Mr. Chairman, you done have 4 lawyers up here. 4 lawyers up here trying to figure it out for some reason. Jill, my friend lawyer, 4 lawyers, they can't work it out. So what are they trying to hide? Republicans or Democrats, what you trying to hide? I agree with you, brother. Why can't it be up to 25,000?
Yes, sir.
You got to put a teeth in it. If you don't, you waste your time. Let them pay if you do wrong.
We had an amendment, Senator Spruill, from Senator Vogel to insert the words not to exceed before $10,000. Are you suggesting a substitute amendment?
Yes, to 25,000.
I'm fine with 25.
Okay,
I'm
so
great with that.
So it seems like the bidding's at 25,000 now, and there's a motion.
Chair, Senator Spruill should have been an auctioneer. He's damn good at it.
We'll discuss this before we vote on the amendment, but there's an amendment now on line 24 to change the wording to say not to exceed 25,000, and on line 29 to say not to exceed 25,000. And I assume
There's one more
you're
line.
seconding each. There's one more line.
Yes, sir, line 17.
17, again, to say not to exceed 25,000. So I assume you're seconding each other's motions.
Mr. Chair, also line 26 is also.
Yes.
And good catch, Senator Boysko, that on line 26, it would also need to say 25,000. So before we vote on those series of amendments, is there any further discussion on the proposed amendments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Surville.
I'm sorry, I haven't heard any motions or whatever, but.
Well, the motion is on line 17, 24, and 29 to say not to exceed $25,000, and on line 26 that the 10,000 would be changed to 25,000.
Second.
Okay.
Senator Surville, did you want to comment on the proposed amendment?
No, he doesn't want to. He's a lawyer. No, he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah, well, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Yes, I do want to comment on it. I mean, I get where we're going here. pointing out we're creating a 3-tiered system here now. One is if you put it, for example, on your grip card that says, here's Scott Sorovel and his family, and here's what he stands for, and here's my website, and you don't put your thing on there, you can be fined up to $1,000 per grip card you give out like that, or per mail piece that you put in the mail. And then if you send out any piece of paper like that without your stuff on it within 14 days of an election day, it's $2,500 per violation, up to $2,500. And then if you expressly advocate against a clearly identified candidate, whatever that means, which I could see being ambiguous, and that could be at any moment in time. That could be right now, 18 months out from an election. It could be the day before an election. It could be somebody putting up a Facebook ad or a Twitter ad or something, but you don't put an authority line on the bottom of it. You can get whacked up to $25,000, and it could be intentional. It could be unintentional. I've seen all kinds of people put things out and they forget the authority line. I cannot tell you how many pieces of political advertising I've seen where somebody forgets the authority line. And so $25,000 is a lot of money, especially if you print something 10,000, 15,000, or 20,000 times and put it in a mailbox by mistake.
Well, let me ask counsel. Counsel, is there anywhere in this code that it says it's per postcard or per occurrence?
Mr. Chairman, there's nothing in the code that says whether it's per postcard or per occurrence. I believe the State Board of Elections has regulations that state it is per occurrence, and they define occurrence in that regulation.
That would be my interpretation, but I'm not a lawyer.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Bell.
I guess I think you answered my question, but I just want to verify. So that basically you just have to have the line saying paid for and authorized by X. Correct?
Yes, sir, and it could be any entity. It just has to have that line.
And on a phone call, same thing?
It's, yes, on the phone call at the very end, yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
1 second, Senator Bell.
Almost feel like, and I don't want to make this more complicated because I like, the intent here, but I almost feel like we need a willful statement in here because as Senator Sorovel has said, I know this makes it more complicated, you could have an ad that where a mistake was made even contractually to put the line in there, it didn't go out, it's not the candidate's fault, and didn't go on it. I know the damage can still be done, but I'm thinking more about the telephone calls. If a volunteer works for your campaign and you give them a script and they go off script and say things and don't give that, then you could still be hit with the fine, even though they haven't followed the instructions given. Can you give me your feelings on that?
Sure. And I'm more flexible on, and that the phone is the 959 part. I'm more flexible on that, but that's why I think two things are in play. With the new language, it's up to, right? So that's already kind of covered in there. Now, if it goes in front of the judge and just says, look, this was a phone call and it was a volunteer. But let's keep in mind, this is not a volunteer calling saying, hey, Senator Bell is a great guy, voting on next Wednesday, please vote for him. This is someone calling and says, hey, Jennifer Boysko is a bad person, and please don't vote for her because of A, B, C, and D. Now, and that's not true, and we know that's not true, but that's the type of calls that this is. It's the advocating against an identified candidate. And to tell you the truth, I've done a lot of phone calls, and I've seen a lot of campaigns do them, and they've all been for a candidate. They've never been a negative hit on a candidate. Those typically will happen more in the print scenarios or TV scenarios.
Okay, we've got Senator McClellan and then Senator Spruill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to ask a couple lawyer questions. So, Senator Spruill.
I ain't saying nothing, Jen.
To Senator Bell's point, I think if it already says that if there's a willful violation, then it's a Class 1 misdemeanor, and there's penalties that include jail there. But listening to what you just said, my First Amendment bell started ringing. Mm-hmm. If what they're saying is true, why would we treat them differently if it's negative versus in favor of a candidate.
Oh, I'm not advocating that we should, because I think the up to 25,000, are you talking about the phone call?
Well, I guess, no, the way this bill is written, it says, in the case of a violation related to an advertisement that expressly advocates against a clearly identified candidate.
Yeah, so why are we treating them differently?
Yes. And how does that not violate the First Amendment?
So right now in code, we already say that you have to have a disclaimer. And I'm not saying you can't lie about a candidate. It happens, unfortunately, all the time, I guess. And I'm not saying that you can't make a phone call, put out a TV ad, or send out a mail piece that lies about a candidate. I'm just saying that you have to obey the law that we've already got in Virginia, which does not violate the First Amendment. And if you have a violation where you mention your opponent, the penalty is higher. And the reason why is there is no value, and we all know this being candidates, and every consultant knows this as well, there is no value for leaving a disclaimer off of a piece that actually speaks positively about a candidate. But there is a lot of benefit to leaving a disclaimer off of a piece that goes and blasts your candidate, especially when you're in a more than a two-person race and you want to put a hit on someone but not have the fallout. So, and this is not a decision that gets accidentally overlooked. It is a decision that consultants make, and I can't say it any better than Senator Vogel did. It's risk reward. And I know that we think the penalty is higher because there's a misdemeanor, 2,500 potential jail time. But I can tell you, and y'all know better than I'm not an attorney, but a willful violation, I don't know what that costs to prove. My guess is most of the time you're not going to prove it. And what would cost to prove it, the State Board of Elections wouldn't even go down that route, and another person wouldn't want to spend the money to do so.
But Mr. Chair.
Senator McClellan.
I don't disagree with what you said. Where I'm getting hung up, though, is we are treating, I mean, I think everybody agrees, and it actually is the law. If you lie about somebody, they can sue you. But, well.
If you have actual malice.
Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, and where I'm having First Amendment concern, is if you do the exact same thing, but you're advocating for a candidate, your bill doesn't apply. If you advocate against a candidate, it does. And to me, that is a clear case of speech content discrimination that would violate the First Amendment.
So, and this may not be the same, I'm not an attorney, but so this bill still applies. So the section of code still applies, right? So it's almost like a speeding ticket, right? If you do over 10 to 15 miles an hour, here's your fine. If you do 15 to 20, here's your fine, and 20 is reckless, and you have a bigger fine. And that's what this says, is this whole piece, this whole section of code still applies.
Mr. Chairman.
It says.
Senator McClellan, were you done with your line of questioning?
I was not, and maybe this is a question for Brooks, because I think we're talking past each other.
You are, yeah.
On line 16, it says, in the case of a violation related to an advertisement that expressly advocates against a clearly identified candidate. So as I read that, this bill will treat people who do the exact same thing differently, depending on whether, when they do it, they are advocating for a candidate versus against a candidate. Is my reading correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator McClellan, that's correct. Yeah, this is aimed at people who expressly advocate against a candidate.
And final question.
Yes, Senator.
And my question for Brooks is, how is that not content discrimination in violation of the First Amendment?
Mr. Chair, Senator McClellan, the Supreme Court has said that the state has an interest in regulating in this area. Now, whether or not treating people who expressly advocate against or for a candidate is unconstitutional viewpoint discrimination, I believe that'd be a novel question. So I don't know that there's been a decision on that.
And if I'm, Mr. Chairman.
Well, first, let's hear from the patron, and then we'll come to Surville. Senator Surville.
And Mr. Chair, I would just say, and I understand not obviously being an attorney, but this bill does not restrict content. You can advocate for, you can advocate against, and I think we understand the same thing. But what happens when you violate the law with advocating, right? So right now, if you were not to have the disclosure, it's a certain fine. And all I'm saying to that is if you do not, you can advocate and say whatever you want, but if you voice a certain opinion on your opponent and you end up breaking the law, which is already in here, which is that disclaimer piece, the fine shall be different. So I'm not advocating that we can't have any speech, and all speech should be protected. I'm just saying that there's already laws in the books about disclaimers. And if you do a certain scenario, the penalty shall be higher than if it's not. Just like the penalty is higher within 14 days than it is outside of 14 days.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sturville, and then Senator Spruill's been waiting.
There's a lot of apples and oranges going on here. You don't have a constitutional right to speed, okay? Mm-hmm. And so it's okay to differentiate conduct based on a school zone or a work zone or whatever, because that doesn't implicate a fundamental constitutional interest. First Amendment political speech is one of the most sort of highly protected constitutional zones that exists in our society, and the courts are extraordinarily hostile to any attempt to regulate speech. And to say that a big fine doesn't tell you what you can say is like saying a speeding ticket doesn't regulate whether you can speed. Okay, so that doesn't fly, all right? So and what I think Senator McClellan is getting at is that we are treating political speech in a differential fashion, and that is some place where you get into some really hot First Amendment waters really quick. So I would just point that out. You guys are talking right past each other because you think this is like speeding. It's not. It's a whole different planet when you regulate what comes out of somebody's mouth, and it gets even hotter when you regulate it when it comes to politics. And there's a woman over here who spends a lot of time advising people on that, setting up organizations for people to speak about politicians, who's probably more familiar with it than any of us in this room. But I would also just note, I don't know what speech against a candidate means. I could see somebody putting out something and saying, I'm not putting out something that's against somebody, I'm just telling somebody the facts. And that's not against them, it's just how they voted on a bill. And now, you know, you got yourself into the $25,000 zone instead of the $1,000 zone based on trying to figure out whether it's for or against or whether it's, or what, right? And so I'm telling you, you're wading into some very hairy territory here. And typically also when you want to regulate political speech, you have to do it with very precise, clear words so that people are on notice of where the line is before they cross it. And I don't know that against a candidate is a clear line that is capable of anybody understanding what they can do.
And I would tell the senator that it doesn't say against a candidate; it says against a clearly identified candidate. And this is something I worked with an attorney on to get that language right. So it's not just a candidate, but it has to be clearly identified. And that's what this goes to. And I agree. I understand we do not want to regulate political speech at all, and I don't want to go down those waters. But this General Assembly has already said, and it's obviously been upheld, that we can regulate political speech by requiring disclaimers on things that are said or printed. And all this does is take that piece that the courts have already said that you can do and take the penalties that we have in place and raise one of the penalties. We already have disparate penalties. One's $1,000, one's $2,500. This just throws one more in that is now up to $25,000. And that's all this does. But it does not wave into the waters of changing what you can and can't say as long as you obey laws that already exist today.
We have in the queue, Senator Spruill, had you been waiting to speak?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman.
Lawyer joke.
No, no, I'm looking at why the lawyers are trying to fix it. What is he trying to say here? That if someone blatantly lie or put out something against you, it's not enough to fine. Because if I say that Scott Silver held is green, turn him blue, and I tell a lie about it, okay, then so the fine of $1,000. If they're gonna get me 10,000 votes, I'm gonna say that and I'll pay the $1,000 fine. What he's saying this is that those who blatantly lie on a person like that should be a penalty. They shouldn't do it. And that's happening all the time. People that are lying, straight out lying about a person and knowing they're lying. And you know a lie goes further than truth any day, especially from politicians, any day. So what's the penalty for that? Nothing. So what he said, we're trying to fix that. And secondly, as far as The radio thing is, you know good and well right now, if I say something, then how do you prove it? And these same lawyers, bless their hearts. If I say right now, if I do that, and I will hire them, and if I pay their price, they're going to make sure that what I say, even though if I said it, if the money's right to these lawyers, if the money's right, they're going to defend me to the teeth. Knowing that I did say it, they're going to tell the truth. So all we're getting at is here, and I agree with him, that how can we get after these folks who are blatantly just lying on somebody? Everybody know they're lying. They put it out there. And once it's out there, you can't spy. I know what it said, that's what it meant. So I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just hoping that these folks on this side of the aisle, on this side of the aisle, stop trying to not fix this thing. He has the right idea. Even if he is right, if you can then fix it. We're just sitting here talking about what he's doing wrong, but you lack his concept, but lack what he's doing. Let's treat him like he's a Democrat. Let's have him fix this bill and get out of here.
Okay, first we've got Senator Bell, Peak, and then Boysko. Senator Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I understand this. Two quick things. One, items A and items B go to the sponsor, which I would assume is the candidate. Item C is to a person. So it's whoever makes that. So it's that campaign volunteer. Is that correct?
It is the person violating. It would be the person violating. So if there was a script provided, I could say the person provides the script, but it would be the person who actually literally violates it. And as it already exists today. It's the same thing as this today. You make a phone call within 14 days without a disclaimer, there's a $2,500 penalty.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
follow-up. Is a robocall count to 10,000 homes counted as one call or 10,000 calls?
According to the State Board of Elections, it's one call.
One call. And last question, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bell.
Door-to-door, I know is not covered in here, but if somebody were to do this door-to-door, there'd be no violation at all?
No,
if
sir.
they did the same thing as long as it's not on a phone call?
No, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, next we've got Senator Peak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just addressing the concerns from Senator Sorville, I just don't see that this is regulating political speech at all. It's just a disclaimer. You've got to have a disclaimer whether it's for you. You've got to have a disclaimer if it's against you. It changes the penalties, but it is not regulating the speech at all as it already exists under Virginia law. If you're putting out a campaign ad, if it's against somebody, it's supposed to have a disclaimer. This simply increases the penalty. I don't see how it brings in any new constitutional issues. I hope we can pass this bill.
Senator Boysko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to bring it back too. I think other people have said, like, this is about a disclaimer, not having it on there. It's not about the content of what they're saying, except that it's a negative ad. It can be perfectly honest. But if you don't say who you are.
Yes, ma'am.
There is a question here around the phone calls. I very much support a robocall, making sure that they have a disclaimer. I have some heartburn around individual volunteers who might not be savvy enough to say, and I'm calling on behalf of the Boysko campaign, for instance. Would you be amenable to clarifying that a little bit more clearly that
I think you're talking about line 28, saying
Yeah.
robo-telephone calls?
yeah.
Automated telephone calls? Yes, ma'am. I'd be more than
Okay.
happy to.
Then I make that motion that we.
Okay, so on line 28, we're adding the word automated between campaign and telephone calls. So it would say campaign automated telephone calls. Is all in favor of that amendment will say aye? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. Now, Senator McClellan, did you want to address us again?
Not to beat a dead horse, but to Senator Peake's
Not yet.
comment, by treating advertisements expressly advocating against a candidate that violate the law differently from advertisements that expressly advocate in favor of a candidate, that by definition is regulating content of political speech differently. If the point here is we want a different penalty for someone who violates the law, and we're treating them the same, whether it's a negative or a positive ad, that's fine. But that's not what this does. What this does is say we are treating negative ads that violate the law differently from positive ads that violate the law. And that, by definition, is content discrimination, period. So I'm still struggling with what it is you're trying to make illegal, but what you are making illegal is one type of speech and not another. And we need to fix that if we're going to pass this bill.
I'm going to call on Senator Vogel and hope that we can start to draw this discussion to a close.
Mr. Chair, I think I can address what it is that she's raising and what her concern is. What it is he's trying to do is he's trying to establish that in a window of time during the election, specifically the 14 days prior, he wishes to create a higher standard for people who violate disclaimer rules. In other words, who try to cheat and try to say something that's not true. And in this case, what she's saying is that he is applying it to only half of the standard of express advocacy. Express advocacy is where you are advocating for the election or defeat of a clearly identified candidate. In this case, we're holding the higher standard to the communication that is just the defeat. So you could simply correct that issue that she has with content by saying the election or defeat so that it's equal. The bottom line is if you're lying about somebody and you're saying something wrong, go ahead and include the election or defeat, understanding that you're really going to apply it when it does true harm to somebody, when you are saying something that is defamatory or horrible about a person, which is almost always going to be in the case of defeat. That would be one way to address this issue. I think what you're trying to do is the policy here is to try to put some teeth into the law so that you cannot just indiscriminately go out there and decide, I'm going to throw caution to the wind, and again, I'm going to weigh the risk reward, and I'm going to realize that I'm going to win. I'm going to say the most outrageous thing, and there is no, I'm going to get caught after the fact, and there really isn't going to be a stiff enough penalty. And we know that it has happened, and that people are, deeply offended by that, and it can throw an election. So I would argue that that is one way to fix it, and that's how express advocacy is defined in the law. And so in this case, you're only defining half of the communication. And if that, Senator McClellan helps round that out, I think that's the solution.
Okay, so is that a proposed amendment, Senator Vogel, or no?
Yeah, that would be a proposed amendment. You could
So that in each
add that to the language so it could say the election or defeat.
So where it says expressly advocates against a clearly identified candidate, lines 16, 17, 23, 29, do you want counsel to come up with the wording there?
And I would ask the patron if the patron is okay with that.
I'm okay with that. I mean, we know what we're getting to, but that covers it both ways, so election or defeat.
So, Mr. Chair,
Senator McClellan?
so just so that I'm clear on what it would say, in the case, so I'm looking at line 16, in the case of a violation related to an advertisement that expressly advocates for the election or defeat of a clearly identified candidate. Is that Senator Vogel's motion? I second that.
Okay, all in favor of that motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, so the bill's amended there. We have not taken up that amendment of increasing the penalty from $10,000 to up to $25,000. Is that motion still on the table? Is that,
We
didn't vote on that.
I'll second that motion.
So
Okay.
move.
Take it up to 25. We're doing away with the minimum mandatory.
Okay, so the next amendment is in the case of each of the three cases where it says, I believe 3 cases where it says $10,000 to say up to, not to exceed $25,000. Civil penalty not to exceed $25,000. All in favor of that will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Now the bill is before us. We have not heard from the public. Yes, Senator
In light
Deeds.
of that amendment we had just adopted, should not line 26 be increased? Because we're saying that through.
Oh, yes,
I thought we
that
did.
needs to increase to $25,000 as well. Do we need to make that a separate motion, Brooks, or is that understood as part of the last one? I guess we. probably we need to vote on line 26 so that,
Mr. Chair, I would move that we.
Let me ask you, can I ask a question first? What if one campaign's in violation of 3 separate offenses?
well, it
Offense
says
under each paragraph.
it's per one particular campaign advertisement that it wouldn't exceed 25,000.
Okay, 25,000, okay.
So that's on line 26. So all in favor of changing that 10,000 to 25,000 will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The bill is now before us. We have not heard from the public.
Move to approve as amended.
Okay, there's a motion to report as amended. Is there anyone in the audience who feels compelled to speak for or against this bill?
Second.
Okay, it looks like we've got 3 people in Zoom land. I'm going to ask that you really be merciful with us on our time, because we've got another committee scheduled to use this room in a bit. So if you could be really brief, Nancy Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our group working on campaign finance supports this bill, and we certainly appreciate Delegate Davis as one of the recipients attacked by obscure ads in the last election. Many of us were watching as nearly $7 million in funding for obscure ads, attacking candidates on both parties.
Thanks very much. We need to get on to the next person.
Thanks very much.
Okay, Jessica Mott.
Yes, Jessica Mott, Arlington, Virginia. I support this law, this bill, and I think creating stronger disincentives to misinformation is to an existing law is highly desirable.
Thank you for your testimony. Sue Lewis.
Yes, thank you. The League of Women Voters of Virginia supports HB 125, including the amendments. Current campaign finance laws need to be clarified and strengthened with regard to political campaign advertisements that advocate against a candidate. Under current law, those sponsoring ads, which clearly should be reported, even under the spirit of the current law, are specifically using vague terms to escape being identified and reported.
Thank you for weighing in. We appreciate it. Okay, so there's a motion to report as amended. Is there any other comment from members of the committee? Okay, all those who are in favor will vote yes on the electronic voting board. Well, it took a little while, but I think you got a good resolution.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I thank the committee. Thank you.
Okay, so next up, we've got Delegate Waxman. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Otto Waxman, I'm here to present House Bill 205. House Bill 205 is designed to prohibit those outside entities from giving financial support or service support to our registrars and help in anticipating of trying to block them from altering the results of the election from the inside.
Delegate, let me interrupt you and tell you that we had a similar bill, Senate Bill 80 from Senator Stanley, and I understand there was a substitute to conform the bill so that they could go to conference and work out any differences.
That is correct.
Okay, all in favor of conforming HB 205 to SB 80 will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Move to report as amended.
Okay. Vote yes if you'd like to report as amended. Okay.
That's 15, no 0.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad. I hope I can keep y'all back on y'all's time schedule.
Thank you for helping us with that. Okay, Delegate Batten.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I have House Bill 542 before you. It's a pretty straightforward bill. This simply reclassifies assistant registrars as deputy registrars. There's no fiscal impact to the Commonwealth, and the language simply does a better job of describing the roles in local voter registrars' offices, and this was at the request of the registrars.
Okay, and I know it passed the House unanimously, although I shouldn't note that. Just to move things along. Are there questions from members of the committee? Is there someone from the registrars or otherwise in the audience who'd like to comment on the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Allison Robbins, General Registrar for the County of Wise. I'm with the Voter Registrars Association, and we ask you to please support this bill.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to comment on this particular bill? Okay. Is there anyone in Zoom land who feels compelled to comment?
If you're in the Zoom room and wish to speak in regards to this bill, please raise your hand electronically now. Mr. Chairman, there are no speakers.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to report HB 542. All those in favor vote aye on the electronic voting board. Those opposed will vote no. Okay.
Ayes 15, no zero.
Next, we've got Delegate Robinson. Delegate Robinson, you have HB 927. Is she in the room? Okay, I guess she'll join us in a moment, but is
Mr.
Delegate
Chair.
Bloxham here?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
is that identical or similar to Senator Suderline's bill that we passed?
It's similar, but I think we should probably hear from her to make sure that she's okay with conforming. Unless she can't be found,
Mr. Chair, if you recall, Senator Suderline's bill was my language. It was his
Yes.
number, but my language. I move we conform the bill.
Second. If she doesn't like that, she can reject it and put it in
We go to
conference.
conference.
Okay, let's take up that motion to conform HB 927 to SB 3, which is allowing the ballots to be, not to be physically sorted, but the results to be reported by precinct. All in favor of conforming will signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so HB 927, all in favor of reporting will vote aye, as amended or conformed. If you could open the voting roll. Okay. Now, we've got Delegate Bloxham, who I believe has two bills for us today, including one that he's prepared to substitute. Which one did you want to start with?
Mr. Chairman, it's your choice. If you want to go with 177, which is closer to your bill, we can start with that one first.
Okay, 177. This is the bill that requires that provided in our version an option for the witness signature where the voter could provide their last four digits of the Social Security number and their date of birth instead of a witness. Delegate Bloxham's bill requires that in addition to the signature, but we have a substitute prepared that would conform it to our bill, my bill, which was SB 273. Okay, is there a second? Okay, all in favor of conforming HB 177 to SB 273 will say aye.
Chair, Mr. Chair, just a
Senator
question.
Peake.
Is it
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
patron okay with that? And is it,
That's fair.
change your bill?
Mine is and. I think the one that passed yours was and or.
Right.
So this will go to conference
Okay.
and we'll
Gotcha.
figure it out there.
Work it out. Okay. So did we vote to conform? Aye. Say aye if you'd like to conform.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. It's been moved and seconded to report HB 177 as conformed. Please vote yes on the electronic voting board if you'd like to report. Okay.
Ayes 15, no zero.
Okay, now we've got HB 175, and there's a substitute.
There is a substitute for that one,
I
Mr.
believe
Chairman.
that we had one at your seat, members, that was prepared. Do you want to explain that to us, Delegate Bloxham?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Now what I've done in the substitute is basically just pare it down from a permanent absentee ballot list to an annual absentee ballot list in a calendar year. The way the process would work is on December the 15th or so, the registrar would send out a application that would be verified with the date and the last four of the social to receive a ballot for any election that they are eligible that year. Instead of having a permanent list where you have official ballots going out until the voter is removed, either by death or when he moves and the registrar catches that he moves, this would actually just every year verify the voter list. And every other provision that was in the bill that passed the House, I stripped out. I've sensed that the Senate didn't like any of those little provisions, so I stripped it down.
Mr. Chair.
Sir Deeds.
How long, Delegate Bloxham, how long have we had the annual, or we had the permanent voter file in
The
Virginia?
permanent list has been in, I think, for 1 year.
Yeah. Well, just speaking to the bill, my
Senator
concern
Deeds.
is that we've gone to great lengths to make Virginia one of the easiest places to vote in, where we have the high rate of participation. Granted, that benefited my side in 2020, it benefited your side in 2021. I don't see any point in changing it. So I would make a motion to PBI the bill.
Could I respond, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, we'll let you have the final word, sure.
I understand the reluctance to move. I think that all I'm trying to do is to verify with verifiable information the voter and where they live. This is a double-edged sword, because if someone moves, a ballot's going to be sent to the address where they were. So when they go to vote, their ballot has been sent out, so they can't vote. They'd have to vote provisional. This is just trying to verify that where they are, the person is going to receive the ballot at the correct address. That's all I'm trying to do.
But, Mr. Chair,
Senator McCollum.
but when someone moves and they have up to a year to change their registration, and that automatically changes their registration with the Department of Elections, thanks to legislation we passed, doesn't elect either adjust or ask them if they want to remain on the list and make that a change with the new registration? Like, there's a mechanism in place already to deal with if someone moves who is on.
If they register, but if they move and they forget to register, then that ballot's going to go to the address where they were last known.
But if they move, they have a responsibility, if they want to vote in, not provisionally, if they've taken the time to go on the permanent list, they know they have a responsibility to elect when they move.
Oh, I do not disagree with the Senator, Mr. Chairman, at all, that they have a responsibility. I just don't think that that's going to be at the top of their list when they go to move. I think this is going to be a process where you're going to have a ballot going out to an address where the person has moved. I'm just thinking of the people at where I live that do not live in the same spot for more than a period of time.
Can I ask, Mr. Chair?
Senator McCollum.
Can I ask a question to Chris Piper? If someone who is on the permanent list, or anybody, if someone is sent an absentee ballot and they don't receive an absentee ballot, can't they either come in person and vote, or isn't there already a mechanism in place for that person to still vote even though they didn't receive that absentee ballot?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, to respond. There are, if somebody appears to vote either early in person or on election day, they can sign an affidavit that they either didn't receive it or they lost their ballot. I will point out to the committee that if an individual moves and they change their address with the post office, if we send it to the old address, it's either going to be forwarded to the new address or it'll come back undeliverable. If it's undeliverable, I don't actually think if it's forwarded, right? It can't be forwarded. Sorry. I apologize. But if it comes back undeliverable, they immediately are flagged for confirmation, and then they go through the confirmation process that is mandated by federal law.
So,
Senator McCollum.
So basically then you're just out postage, but that person still has the right to vote.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Assuming that they still, yeah, sorry.
Your motion. Was there a second to that motion? Okay. So all in favor of PBI in this bill that we already heard similar testimony on similar legislation will vote aye on the electronic voting board.
Ayes 9, no 6.
Okay, now don't go anywhere because we have two more bills, and I apologize. Delegate Walker, I didn't have you on my sign-up list, but I saw you come in, I think, a little bit more recently.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's you, right? Delegate Walker? Okay. No, that's fine. Please come forward. And we have one more bill after that. Okay.
I'm sorry. I hope this is the shortest and sweetest of your bills before you today. That's HB 1140. Very simply, Virginia law currently requires the general registrars to provide notice of cancellation of a voter's registration to the voter by mail. to the address listed on the voter registration record. This bill adds a provision that requires the general registrar to provide notice of the cancellation of a voter's registration to an email if the email address is already provided on the voter's registration form. The Virginia voter registration application currently has a portion available that is provided on the registration form by which you can use email as well as a physical address. This bill serves to provide an extra layer of notification to voters when the registration has been canceled for whatever reason, especially when there's already an option in place if voters choose to fill that
So,
portion
Mr.
out.
Chair, this bill simply says that you have to mail it to their address and send it by email if you have an email address.
If theirs. And the reason for that, and Senator, if I may, in the city of Lynchburg, we have 5 colleges. So what happened last year after the 2020 election, many of the students who went to vote because of the rule changes found out they weren't able to vote. I mean, some were able to vote provisional. So this is very simply just fixing the bill and you make an adjustment to the code.
Where did you get this great idea?
I'm sorry, Senator.
May I ask where you got the great idea for this bill?
From a lot of complaints, sir.
Okay.
So when I went to the registrar,
legislation
I
is
said,
born that
why
way.
are so many students? Senator P can verify that 5 colleges are great colleges, and we love it when young people participate in the voting process. But when a number of them came back to us, and I heard through the registrar's office, this is what happened, because college students have a tendency to move around. They may start out in the dorms and wind up moving into a physical place in town. So very simply, it's just another way of notification to make sure they get an opportunity to vote.
Thank you. Is there, we have not heard this bill that passed the House unanimously before. Are there those who feel compelled to testify for this fast-moving train?
Move second.
Okay. Well, I hear from up here there's a motion. So all in favor will vote aye on the electronic voting board, and we have one more bill after that. Okay.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you. Committee members, Brooks, do you have that other bill? We have some appointments that had not been previously before us from the governor, and we have a bill. Apologies that it wasn't on the agenda earlier, but I didn't want to call a meeting at the chairman's desk. I prefer to do it here. So this is a joint resolution confirming members of the Safety and Health Codes Board and the Public Safety and Homeland Security, the Virginia Parole Board. Their paperwork is in order, so I would entertain a motion to report. Is there a second? Okay, is there any discussion among members of the committee? Okay, all in favor of reporting this will vote aye.
Ayes 15, no zero.
Okay, I believe that concludes our business for the year. So, thank you.
Well done.